Welcome to Season 2 of Ventures and Visionaries, Episode 6, Creating Impact That Outlives Your Job. This podcast is about vision and entrepreneurship or business and innovation. I'm your host, Morty Hackle. Welcome to the show. Our guest today is Dr. Michelle Griffin, CEO and founder of Griffin Resources. Griffin Resources provides fractional human resources support for small and mid-sized firms. Welcome, Michelle. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Obviously, I can, do a little bit of a background, but I think you'll probably do a little bit more. Maybe just give us a little bit of your history and story, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Thank you so much. So my history of my career has been in HR the majority of my career. Weirdly enough, I was an auto theft and arson investigator for about 6 years. And then I transitioned into HR. My first HR job was at ConnectWise, pretty large IT software company. I was there until about 2017, and then I went into residential construction. That was a weird shift in my career to go from tech to construction, and learned a lot about HR when it comes to culture and vision and mission and how to really adapt into different companies. While I was there, that's when I started a lot of my higher education. I'd finished my master's about the same time I was starting at ConnectWise, and then I started getting my doctorate while I was at the construction company. And then I decided I wanted to go to be an independent contractor while I was finishing my doctorate. And rather than turn away work or figure out what my capacity was, I just started hiring people to essentially start a company while I was getting my doctorate. And then eventually, obviously had a 7-figure company while finishing my PhD. So I finished my PhD a couple of years ago and obviously still run the company. So Griffin Resources, I essentially took my knowledge of an HR department, mostly from ConnectWise, running a pretty large company. When I left there was about 850 people across 10 states and 4 countries, and I was running HR for all of it, including the international branches. And so I wanted to take all of those really big resources that only large corporations have down to the smaller mid-sized businesses and provide them with resources they don't usually get to have. And so we created a fractional model that could make sense and be affordable for small to mid-sized businesses. And so that's where Griffin Resources came from.
That's really cool. It's a great story. What just out of curiosity, like what made you decide that you wanted to go towards the smaller businesses and service them in a way that they weren't being serviced? It sounds like your career was pretty successful with the larger companies, probably a lot more resources.
When I was at the construction company, they had just under 100 people and were in one state. So they were obviously much more manageable than ConnectWise. But they still had all of HR under the CFO. And I originally had a theory that small to mid-sized businesses may just assign HR to maybe an office manager or some low-level employee. That was a complete misconception. Most owners, CEOs, COOs, and even CFOs will manage HR up until the company is a pretty large size, 50, 75, even 100 people, before they start actually bringing in experts in HR and affording that expense. And that can really get companies in trouble because they don't have the time or the expertise in HR or employment law and really be able to handle investigations and things of that nature. So I wanted to kind of take what I have learned and bring it down to small to mid-sized businesses. And my very first client only had 15 people. And so that's where I kind of realized, I could figure out a way to just kind of help out small to mid-sized businesses. And then as I became a business owner myself, I started empathizing more with the smaller businesses because it took me a few years, I think, to really think like a business owner and flip a switch to really think and call myself CEO. And once I had that under my belt, I could really talk to the owners not only about HR and employment law, but how that actually impacts their business and their taxes and their cash flow and become, a bigger resource to what they could do and build their company and help them grow.
Ventures and Visionaries is grateful to be sponsored by KJ Technology. For over 25 years, KJ has helped middle market businesses unlock growth, through strategic technology advisory services. Whether you're a fast-moving alternative financial firm or a boutique wealth management office, KJ delivers tailored managed IT solutions that scale with your ambitions. And for those who only demand the best at home, KJ brings enterprise-grade network technology to high-end residential environments, blending performance, security, and vendor management from the boardroom to the living room. KJ Technology is redefining what it means to be connected, protected, and empowered. Learn more at kjtechnology.com or email for information at info@kjtechnology.com. I'm a business owner. You're a business owner. What are the couple of key tips that seem to come often, more often than not?
A lot of business owners keep control for too long. They wear so many hats and they don't know the right time to just start delegating or figuring out how to delegate or what to outsource or what resources are out there for them to outsource. And we started weirdly adding on more areas of opportunity that our clients were asking for and or partnering with companies that we could work with. For example, bookkeeping and a fractional CFO. And so we started adding on some of these features just because we were realizing these business owners were just holding on to that for way too long. And they're stretching themselves really thin, which really prevents them from growing their business too. And so I feel like that's really where we start to see companies just getting stagnant at a point where they just limit themselves. We see that a lot at 8 to 10 people. That's also a point where they have to start hiring strangers. Most of the time you can grow your business up to that point by hiring, people in your network or your employees' networks. And at some point, right around 8 to 10 people, you have to go through traditional recruiting processes to hire people. And then you're competing for talent with bigger businesses that offer benefits and things of that nature. Time off, they're going to start asking for, traditional policies that small businesses haven't already created. And so we help them make sure they have handbooks and policies and procedures in place that are there to protect the company. Most people think they're there to help the employees, and really it's a framework to make sure that the company knows how to treat everyone fairly and keeps themselves out of trouble. When they don't do that, they accidentally get themselves into trouble. They end up with a Department of Labor complaint. They'll end up with an EEOC complaint. And then it's kind of gotten away from them for too long. And so we kind of help prevent all that. We're also cheaper than attorneys, so it's a little bit easier to work with us before you get that far.
That's actually a very smart thing that you're suggesting, meaning like it's better to recognize that I've grown my business to a particular size and now I need to start looking for the right kind of expertise, but not necessarily bringing a person or a full person in-house, rather find a fractional expertise. And Griffin Resources can provide that not only directly, but with also a bunch of partners that can help out.
Right. And a lot of times we're so fractional, it doesn't even make a part-time person. And we're talking 5 hours a week or less. And if we're processing payroll, that may only take 3 to 5 hours every other week, or how often you're processing payroll. And a lot of times those, areas, while it's not a lot of time, it's not being handled by someone with that expert versus, you're paying less than a part-time person. There is an inflated hourly rate, but you're paying for, the expertise, someone with 10 years of experience, certifications, and things like that. And so it stays affordable for what you're getting and for the hours that we're spending on it. And then a lot of times I've heard CFOs tell me if they're still managing payroll, while it's not a lot of time to process payroll, it's just a mental distraction and it's just enough time to be annoying. And it's like, I might as well just, give it to you. It only costs them, $500-$700 a month for us to process payroll, prepare payroll, make sure they have all the reports that they need. And they don't have to think about it other than checking it and approving it, making sure the cash flow is there and moving on, versus actually stopping and thinking and making sure it's right. And then moving back into whatever, more important business that they're working on. So we've seen that a lot where it's like, I just don't want to handle this. It's just a distraction. HR is, some of those things are like, I just have people asking me for a benefits card and little tiny things that are just helpful to the employees, but not the right place to be sitting with a COO or CEO.
Maybe let's veer a little bit and maybe talk to us about, as somebody who's managed culture in larger and smaller organizations, and also obviously help people and clients with culture questions. What are the lessons that you learned from running your own company and the culture within that you've implemented from seeing all kinds of different cultures on the outside?
The tech industry was the fact that I got started in HR and tech, I think broke me. there's
I'm so
there's
sorry.
tech
I
is
hear
such a
that. I
unique
know.
culture.
Indeed.
And especially kind of that competition with Silicon Valley, everyone is a lot younger. And so, the average age at ConnectWise, even with 800 people, like regardless of how big we got, there was still the average age of 31. No matter, I don't know what it was. Like we would just always keep hiring younger and younger. And with that comes a lot of, expectations of, being fun and, you spend a lot of time at your job. And so people really wanted to create relationships and things like that and friendships that really lasted. Versus like when I was at the construction company, that's when I learned like they had very different motives. They didn't really want to decorate the office. I kind of got in trouble with decorating for Halloween from the CFO because she was very religious. Going and decorating for Christmas was much easier, but we really had to tone down some decorations for Halloween and keep things, very calm in the office for that. But I started getting them hosting baby showers and some things to really celebrate each other. And that I brought with me to them. And some of that they really appreciated, some of it they didn't. And I really had to respect the boundaries of that culture. And I was pretty young when I was doing that as well and had a lot of lessons learned for that. For my company, everyone is remote. And I built this kind of during COVID. I started in 2019 at the very end of that. So I was only about 6 months old when COVID hit. And from there, all of my employees have worked remote. I actually have employees I've never met in person that I've had for 4 years or 5 years. And it's, one of those things where we have learned how to communicate and work together completely by camera. And it has helped us when people are open to that. We've also had a lot of turnover when we weren't really sure how to, hire the right way or hire the right people or hire for our culture. And so working completely remote is a culture in its own, and making sure that we have resources and ways to communicate and share, have security and all that kind of stuff to make sure we can share documents securely through, OneDrive and have our own IT security. So one of the things I had to stop and set up at one point was all the security and the resources and, password protections and things like that for everybody. And so I had to take it from a tech perspective as well as a culture perspective. For me, from HR, I feel like everyone knows, like, or at least maybe not everybody knows, but a lot of times HR is a thankless job. And most HR employees have to fight for their value all the time. And that is something that as an internal culture, I wanted to make sure that no one felt like that while they worked for Griffin Resources. And I wanted to make sure that they had a voice. So if they're working with a client that they feel like that doesn't work for them or, it's not the right fit, we can switch out employees with that client because the client's probably feeling that pain too. And so their job is with Griffin, not with the client. And that's really helped us like grow and manage that too. So I've had a lot of people ask me about how to create an online culture when it comes to stuff like that. And so we've had a lot of things learned that we get to pass on like that. Versus like we have clients where they have an in-office presence and we are still remote. And then we have to help create kind of a go-between between us and how we work with them and how they work with HR that is remote. So we have a different culture between our clients and us, and then us individually with each other. So I always looked at it from an external culture and an internal culture.
So, full disclosure, KJ Technology is a client of Griffin Resources, and we're obviously super happy from that perspective. And major plug there. And we are, from the KJ side, we are a hybrid kind of work company. Some employees are fully remote, other employees are part, and some of the employees are fully in the office, which is an interesting thing to manage. And for a company that was born fully remote, as our company is something that we value because it brings a lot of talent, and perhaps even flexibility hours wise because of the way people work. On the flip side, one of the things that I'm always concerned about is young people and mentoring them. Curious, Michelle, if you've encountered young people who are in startup jobs looking for opportunities, and in a hybrid or fully remote work environment, the shoulder tap culture of asking questions can be minimized or almost completely gone. How would you, what would you suggest to companies that are dealing with issues like that to do?
I think it also comes into play. There may be ways to physically communicate, and I'll tell a story of one that got a little creepy. But there is ways you have to get the young people. They don't advocate for themselves very well. They're not used to the corporate environment, so they don't usually ask for help, which is an issue. Even though there's a lot of times we would tell people, speak up, let us know, like, this is what we're giving to you. You have to, work with us too. So those are probably some of the things that I've seen the most is while we are trying to encourage them to speak up and ask and communicate, it tends to feel a little one way a lot of times. So I feel like I don't know if that's the newest generation kind of situation or just because they also grew up very digital and obviously COVID affected them, especially now most of it was through college or end of high school. And, now that it's been 5 years later, they're socialized very differently than, the older generations, millennials and olders. So I feel like there are ways to make sure that they have a, secure kind of not channels, but secure ways to communicate, like Teams chats or, there's Slack. There's different ways to create, little communication channels that are, company provided. It doesn't have to be by text and things like that, to try to make sure that they have a way to just have candid conversations. Also, managers need to know to give live time feedback. Performance management is kind of going away of the dodo bird. Employees hate it, employers hate it, HR hates it, everyone hates performance management, and they do it in just a way that it was created, literally in the 80s. And so nothing has fundamentally changed in, 40, 50 years when it comes to performance management. And the only thing that really has, from a science perspective, that has really changed in performance management is direct live time feedback. So you can't just kind of like sit around and fester and then wait and then be like, oh, at your 1 year, we're going to discuss your whole year of things that you may or may not remember or have documented, versus like as soon as something happens, give feedback. And obviously research shows to give positive feedback, so that they know what they're doing right, versus, obviously they need, constructive criticism, and helping them accept constructive criticism is also important because not a lot of people know how to accept it. And so we have to usually do a lot of management training on how to work with employees. Like, for example, I had a sales associate that had just followed up on a sales proposal, and the way that she followed up and the way that she, kind of framed it to them, because we're waiting for a board approval, which takes a lot longer than, just working with business owners. And it was in a beautiful email. And I don't care if she used ChatGPT to write it. The fact that she, knew her tools and knew how to write it, I immediately wrote her back and said, this is, an exceptional email. And she actually wrote back, thank you so much. This gives me encouragement. And the way that she even said thank you was, a higher level of thinking. So the funny story I want to say about like tapping each other on the shoulder, I had a client that used, I don't even know what the program was called, but essentially it was like Teams, but it was like a video conferencing option. And they had green, yellow, and red lights on their screen, essentially. So if their light was green, you could just turn on their camera and talk to them as if you had walked in their office or their cubicle, which I thought was a little weird. If it's yellow, think of that as like your door is closed and you have to knock first, and then they can say, yes, what's up? And then if it was red, it meant they're in a meeting or not available or whatever. But they could just turn on the camera and just start chatting with them and start talking with them. And they seemed to like it. I thought it was a little creepy. I was like, I feel like people are going to get in trouble just showing up. But
a little invasive, but at the same time, there seems to be a very nice way of creating the camaraderie that otherwise potentially could be missing. But I really like where you're going with this, and I read somewhere that negative feedback can only be overcome with multiple positive feedback because of the way we emotionally
Mhm.
relate to the criticisms. And one of the things that I always wonder about, and I don't remember, and I'll try and keep this clean, positive feedback sandwiched with negative feedback is often referred to as an excrement sandwich. Um, so I try to avoid that. I don't know that I'm always successful, but it's an interesting idea on just, hey, that's an exceptional email. I'm just trying to catch people doing something right. I really love that idea. Any other tips like that you can share with people who are remote that perhaps would love, ideas on how to communicate with people other than,
Yeah.
barging into their remote office?
One of the things when I was doing my research, I did a case study of a company that's in Macedonia and Serbia. And I was specifically looking at technology, and it was called Information Technology Communication, or ITC. And basically, I was really trying to find out how do they communicate, not only across, in our world, different states, but their different countries. And they were using a tool that allowed people to, every week, they could give feedback either confidentially or with acknowledgement to other people in other departments. So they could shout out to people that helped them in projects or whatever that might be. And at the end of the week, there would be someone who would get an acknowledgement for being the most recognized, or there would be some kind of prize and or some kind of just kind of like a kudos sticker, not much crazy things. And then over the span of a month or a quarter, they would look at who got a lot of recognition. And they said like one of the prizes was like a self-help kind of book about how working in the office or, whatever that might be. It was very relevant to, their culture and their feedback and stuff. And they said that they really, really enjoyed it because it helped them, get live time feedback. They could really get positive feedback from each other. Everybody else in the office could see it and get recognition for it. And the employees themselves really managed it. When I talked to HR, they really didn't do much to physically manage it. Other than make sure the prizes got distributed, but they really, as employees, loved it because they could just give shout out to each other. And I've seen HRIS systems give something similar, like a Facebook feed or something else that can give public recognition through the company, and also private recognition would be between a manager and employee. So there's ways to do things publicly and privately. But yeah, doing things in like live time, helping each other with projects, giving shout outs when things are done on time or early, anything where you're like, just kind of like, thank you. It goes a long way.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that when people feel felt and feel seen and feel heard, it helps them really blossom. Whereas on the flip side, beating up people really rarely gets the results that we want. Um, let's go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which I thought was so interesting. At around 8 to 10 people, you said that we now need to hire people outside of our sphere of influence as business owners. Um, so I would imagine at that point, a business owner really needs to spend a few minutes thinking rather than intuiting the culture they're looking to build. And they would have to start thinking about the kinds of people they're looking for. Are there any guidelines or some tips that you could have from years of experience in this area of what would be issues that people should start to think about and how they can grow their business intentionally rather than accidentally?
One of the things that I did that I found very helpful, and we had already been doing it for our clients, and it depends on your size and how invasive you really want to get with it. I think I was at about 15 people when I took my leadership coach and turned her internal. And I had her reach out to every single employee and kind of do a culture survey questionnaire, asking them for feedback and information and areas of improvement, and what did if they could describe the company, what would they describe? Why do they work there? Why have they been there? What keeps them there? And that way we could define what was important to those people. We saw a lot of turnover in, I think it was 2023, because we were still just doing traditional hiring. and figured out that, people weren't staying, and we hadn't got it right for what type of culture fit well with us and make sure we're getting the right people. Because when we were hiring in 2020 and through 2023, people had to work remote. They didn't have a choice. And as offices started opening back up and either being required to work in the office or had an option for that, we realized that some people we were hiring were not good as individual contributors working alone at home. Or we even offered to try to give people to pay for an offsite office, a co-working space. So we tried to offer that, although that wasn't successful either. And so we started to realize not everybody works well alone. And we even had someone admit to the fact that they would rather work in a team and collaborate. They also admitted that they wanted to hide and not have to work as hard. Because for us, they clock their time hourly. And so if they're not just sitting there receiving salary. So if they're not working, they're not getting paid and they can't hide. And so they actually admitted they didn't like that. And so those were some of the things that we saw. And we figured out by just interviewing everybody in the office, what our culture meant. And what we figured out is we have average salaries. We don't have exorbitant salaries because we're trying to keep our prices good for our clients. We're trying to keep things affordable. So we have a balance between making sure people are paid really well and what we're charging our clients. And so when it comes to, making sure that we are giving extra, needs to them, that is where they're willing to take, an average salary. We kind of call it selling your soul for money. I had a client call it golden handcuffs. So they would rather receive, average pay for work-life balance, for, being able to, schedule meetings when they need to schedule meetings. And, we have a lot of working parents that can work when, they don't have to take their kids to and from school, and they can work midday, they can work in the mornings, they can work in the evenings. And, other than scheduling, front-facing meetings, they can, work back end whenever they are available and would like to. So we have a lot of, benefits when it comes to working remote and not having a set. I no longer have business hours for anybody. And they're allowed to work other than deadlines. Payroll obviously has very strict deadlines to get that in. So other than payroll having their deadlines or scheduling meetings that they need to have, they really have whatever business hours work for their schedule. So that was our benefit. So making sure that we continued to do that. Also, because we're so fractional, we have a lot of part-time people that want to work part-time on purpose because that's what their schedule wants, especially from COVID. They're redirected their priorities to their families versus, working a lot of times. They're like, I would rather work less and, be able to have that flexibility. So we also wanted to make sure that we were able to accommodate a lot of that too. And when it came to, obviously for part-time people, we honestly wanted to give back to them too. They asked us for paid time off. So we accommodated that, and I give paid time off to part-time people. I give a floating holiday. They don't receive holiday pay, but we do give them a 401k match. So we give a lot of benefits that most part-time people wouldn't see, that are a little comparable to the full-time people too. And so that was all from their feedback. Bigger companies, I would say if you're at about 20 people, you could do a survey monkey. We do work with our clients and our leadership coach to create customized or even standard, whatever you want to work with, questionnaires that can go out. You don't have to spend the time to spend an hour with every single person. You don't have to spend 15 hours on some kind of project like this. You could just send out a Survey Monkey survey, and then we collect it all, we analyze it, and give back confidential, full results, rather than, kind of waiting for, people feel like their manager, their owner is going to see their exact answers. So it's also nice that we do that from a third party perspective and keep their, anonymity for that.
I wonder if this is a good segue to talk about another demographic that I think could really benefit from our conversation, and that is, it's hard as a technologist or people who have been around the technology world to not talk about AI, but there's a lot of conversation around whether or not that's going to erode jobs, not erode jobs. So now you're dealing with people who are in the middle of their career who need to reinvent themselves, and in technology that's been common for many, many years. But let's just think about that for a moment from a people perspective. What kinds of advice or recommendations would you have for somebody who's feeling like their job is getting to become a little stale? They need to move on. Maybe they involuntarily have moved on and they now need to reinvent themselves. What are some tips to be relevant in tomorrow's economy that you think would be relevant for the audience?
A lot of times for the last couple of years, advice that we were kind of giving and noticing was that your job may not be taken by AI, but it's going to be taken by someone who knows AI. And I think that is still starting to hold true because we are seeing a lot of layoffs in the tech space. And there's, mass layoffs for large corporations that can turn to AI or automation and or even programs and software that can take over a whole job, especially when it comes to let's say bookkeeping, accounts payables, reconciliations. Like that world is going completely into automation. And so you no longer need a person to sit there and reconcile your books, especially if things are paid directly and things are connecting in your bookkeeping system. So we are seeing people getting laid off in that area. And developers, obviously, AI was weirdly enough, that was the first area to attack, even though I think developers created it. So that was one, even, I don't even know where it stands today, how good it is. I've obviously talked to developers and, I know that it's got its faults and I think they can help identify some missing areas of code and things like that. So I feel like they're, finding ways to take continuing education and trainings and figuring out the best way to incorporate AI into your career and using AI to better your own skills is what I'm starting to see is the future. And the academic field is obviously, a lot of people are talking about how it's struggling to bring people coming out of college to be ready for jobs that have AI. And professors and teachers are really struggling about not saying, I'm going to give you an assignment that can be done by AI, but rather I'm going to give you an assignment where you're going to use AI as a tool, and I'm going to teach you how to improve your own skills using AI as, a framework. So maybe you ask AI to create the outline for your paper and you kind of work through writing your paper, and then you use obviously Grammarly and things like that to improve your own skills, and you get ideas and you can work with AI. I use AI every single day. I probably have ChatGPT up like literally all the time. And I use it obviously for writing emails, writing proposals, updating, language that I need to change, things like that on a regular basis. And then also I will, use it for financial analysis and predictions and, other modeling and things like that. So it's definitely being used and you can't shy away from it. You can't ignore it anymore. But being able to incorporate into your job and knowing how to do that is what's going to probably save most people. You do have to skill up. There's still a problem of how do you get into a skill and a job when there's that barrier to entry. I think that's always been, the case. You need experience, but you can't get experience till somebody takes a chance on you. So internships and, using, other ways to get into the field companies are going to have to be open to that to build the skill, to build up what they need to work. And I think companies need to be open to that, to building what they need a person to become, rather than saying, I need someone with 5 years of experience that can hit the ground running and kind of build their talent, which can also control their culture and their skill as well. As long as, employees are willing to stick around, we're seeing, turnover with the next generation being much faster than we've ever seen before. Their attention is
So people are not
struggling
staying a
at like
minimum of, let's
6
say,
to 8
2
months.
years.
No,
Really?
they're not
Wow.
staying a year.
That quick?
Hmm.
They're not even staying a year.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-mm.
And what do
Mhm.
employers think about that from the other side?
I think a lot of it comes to, like you said, voice and feeling heard. So when a lot of research is being done now on the next generation, and obviously there's every generation has their stereotypes.
Sure.
The next one, Gen Alpha, is the youngest ones that are starting to enter the workforce now, and they for them, the things that are important to them is a community, being a part of their community, feeling heard, and having a voice. And for millennials and Gen Xers, we're like, you've been here 5 minutes, like you don't even know anything to have a voice. But for them, they're like, well, if you're not going to listen to me, because they feel like they've grown up with technology, maybe they can help in areas that can progress a company that is stuck in their ways. They don't have a voice, they're not being taken seriously, they'll leave, and they just won't stick around through the hard times. And even with talking with a Gen Xer, not Gen Xer, Gen Zer. With Gen Z, there's so many generations in the workforce, right? I think there's like 5 all working together right now. Gen Zers, they were really bad job hoppers as well. And so for them, their average is, 15, 16 months, like a year and a half kind of thing. And, and they are struggling, to get a job. And a lot of times, because we're still like looking for the people with, longevity, and that's the kind of, relationship we want with our employees. The problem with them is I'm like, you don't have 6 years of experience. You have 3 times 2. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, it's not, they're like, well, I have all this experience. I need an $80,000 a year job. I'm like, no, you don't. You have worked, one job 3 times. I'm like, that's not worth the same.
Right. It's interesting. It's interesting to see that, and I wonder again. Obviously, look, I'm an old man at this point, and going towards the other half of my career. So, thinking a little bit about what it means to give back and mentoring young people and things like that. And when people ask me if I'd be willing to connect them, I'm obviously very willing to. But I'm always interested in what separates the people that are just in it for the job as opposed to people that are actually looking to build a career, and maybe even if it's not what they thought it was going to be initially, explore and start to learn and really try and figure it out. Maybe it's not for them and then you move on, but maybe it is. And how would one know unless one tried?
At least with the Gen Zers and the working with them, they were very interested in mentors. I saw a lot of respect for, people that were willing to work with them and see mentorships really happening and being taken advantage of. For Gen Alpha, I think it's still a little early to tell what they're going to want and kind of see how that's going to shape in the workforce, because their priorities are so different. For them, I don't know if we've really seen career pathing come out from them, because of the gig economy that is really starting with them. They are really wanting to, live and want their life quality, and a job is something that provides them income versus seeing fulfillment from their career. And I think that gig economy has really affected finding yourself and finding, enjoyment from the longevity of a career. So I think that's kind of where we have to really just wait and see what their priorities are going to look like.
Would you think that the definition of entrepreneurship with these generations may change?
Interesting. They're starting to see entrepreneurship as a way to work for themselves as a solopreneur, because they have income streams that weren't available before. So obviously there's income streams through social media and being an influencer, and they are able to make money off of performing hobbies, and which we wouldn't see as a career path. And, so there, and then they turn that into a full-on production of a company. And so people literally can go from, making videos of them making cookies to literally opening a bakery, and make videos of them making candles, to opening a full-on e-commerce of selling candles and soaps and things of that nature. So it's insane, of an entirely new way to enter the workforce and work for yourself. So they kind of see themselves as being able to create a solopreneurship, and continue to work for themselves and make an income. That doesn't necessarily mean they're business savvy or that they understand marketing and they understand how to hold a business for a long period of time, because I don't know if they really understand the education that needs to happen in order to do that. But we're starting to see them, really tackle some things and work for themselves, and kind of having some income streams that we're not used to seeing.
So it really sounds like we're going to potentially look at small business, for lack of a better term, really having a revival as people enter the workforce in, let's call it, non-traditional ways.
And that's why every time TikTok was talking about getting banned, there was huge backlash, because so many small businesses were making an income directly off TikTok. And some of it was their only stream of income, till they realized if TikTok is going to be challenged, then they're going to find other avenues of social media to impact. And so now there's multiple, that are still very popular, but that still seems to, really remain a way that small businesses are finding ways to make money. And then other businesses that were already a traditional business are starting to figure out how to use that as ways to generate, leads and things like that for their business.
Maybe for all the young folks who are coming into the business world non-traditionally, for lack of a better term, any habits that you've picked up along along the years that you've been working, both as a head of HR, a larger company, as well as advising companies, what kind of habits are you've seen to be the key to success?
It's definitely a lot of self-discipline. The grind is real. It's not like things happen quickly or overnight. And I think the damaging part of social media is people don't see the hard part. And when they do show that, it is rare. It obviously gets a lot more views and things like that too, when you see the mistakes and things like that, or the struggle. To grow the business as big and as fast as I did is unusual. So I got to 7 figures in 3 years. Usually it takes companies 5 to 7 years, and most of the time you're not even profitable until that time. My business has always been profitable because of the way I designed my cash flow and the way that my overhead worked. I didn't pay for overhead I couldn't afford. I didn't pay for processes or applications I couldn't afford. So it was literally people working hours, and charging for that time was a 1-for-1 relationship. So I had a lot to learn when it came to how to not only manage the business, because I only knew HR and ops and insurance and payroll. I didn't know marketing and business development and accounting. I didn't know any of that part. And so it took me a couple of years, because at the same time I was still getting my doctorate. So a lot of my attention was really split. I did have a mentor on my dissertation committee tell me, don't have a kid or start a business while you're getting a doctorate. And he was like, I didn't have a kid, but I definitely had the business. And I can see why that's a big problem, because your attention is really split. So people that are like, well, I'm going to go try this, and then I'm going to go try this, and then I'm going to try this. The problem with that is your attention is really split. And if you can focus your attention in one direction, you really end up progressing as fast as you really want. But it does take long hours and repetitive workload, and making sure that you're putting in the grind to see the results. Unless it depends on your capacity and how much, how fast you want to see results. The more time you put in, the faster you'll see results. Also with marketing leads, for any kind of like lead generation for getting out there and networking, has been the best way that I was able to grow my business. Usually through LinkedIn connections. And that's actually how I got KJ. It was a LinkedIn connection that led to me going to an in-person conference. And then from there, I was connected to KJ. And then, we ended up becoming clients after that, because I'm in Florida and you guys are in New York. But we met in Orlando. And so that was some of the things that took online and in person and things like that. But so usually from the time it takes to start your marketing to seeing results can be 3 to 4 months, depending on how much grind you're really kind of chucking out there. And so that's some of the things I would say it does take, you have to really have a lot of grace with yourself to grow it that way, and even to like manage a business. There's a lot to learn. And I don't know if that actually answered the question about habits, but like you really have to figure out, probably what works best. But you have a lot to learn to run a business, effectively.
There's definitely no question that putting in the work is required, and as you noted, having the end result appear magically on a screen, much like the old style cooking shows, they would stick it in the oven, it would magically come out already made. That doesn't happen in real life. But I think you're very on point in the sense that social media presents the idyllic scenario of what this looks like rather than seeing the blood, sweat, and tears. And funnily enough, it almost seems like people want the authenticity now, and they're craving that. They want to know where people failed. They want to know what didn't go right and where your missteps were, and that makes people feel real, as opposed to like, I'm just going to call it plastic for lack of a better term, but I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. It's a veneer on what reality is. It's just weird.
In relation to kind of feeling authentic, it also makes it feel relatable and achievable. So that's usually I'll get asked, what were some of the biggest lessons learned? If I could go back and tell myself something over again, what would I tell myself? Things like that, because that's what people are looking for. I did a lot of market research before setting up my company. I actually had about 300 or 400 conversations as part of my market research, reaching out to other consultants, other HR firms, other HR consultants, going to conference and speaking with all the speakers and things like that, authors, and really asking, how did they make their money? What did they set their prices at? What did they learn? And so I did a lot of research that I was very willing to share from my knowledge. And that really helped me along the way. But, really telling people the mistakes you made and that kind of thing makes it feel like, if they can do it and it went through that, then I can do it too.
I think that's inspiring. The reality is, I think deep down inside, we all know we're not perfect. It's just, we don't like to admit it publicly, but we all know we're not perfect. And I suppose, and maybe this is a slightly religious bent on life, I don't know, but the idea that it's here to evolve, and grow. In any event, I had just a quick question for you. Are there any passion projects that you'd like to share?
There's probably a few that we've been playing with. AI is actually one of them. So we've been working on building our own AI, and what we want to do it with is taking a lot of information that we get about our clients. And like, we'll just use KJ as an example. So we want to make it so that we can isolate an AI to know what we know about our clients, the handbook, policies and procedures, kind of like frequently asked questions that we would get about managing those people, and be able to teach it to give us back information so that we don't have to go digging for it, because we wanted it'll help us scale, because we've about 80 clients now. And, most of the time our team members have about 5 or 6 clients for them to manage before they, really get to capacity. And it doesn't necessarily mean that their time is at capacity, but they're mentally at capacity. And so, for example, if a team member reaches out to us and says, what's our holidays again? Is this coming up holiday covered or not? And, we would be like, well, we don't remember your exact holidays. Let me go look in your handbook, copy and let you know what all they are and how your pay periods lie and when do you get paid for that holiday, and look up all that information and give it to you. Versus if we had trained an AI to know that exact information about that client, if we don't want to necessarily give our client access to that tool, our team member can look that up. We want it to, AI has a way of lying a lot. So to combat that, we wanted it to give us receipts and show us what handbook did they pull that from, what's the page number, and what's the information they got that from, so that we can kind of show and prove that the information is accurate. Another thing we wanted to build in order to scale was teach an AI everything about all of our team members, so we don't kind of forget about people's expertise. And so we wanted, we're kind of dabbling in training it all, like essentially a manager's tool for ourselves. So each manager right now can kind of manage 5 or 6 people. And we want to be able to maybe, get to 8 or 10 people under each manager. And that way we could have them say, we have a client that's asking for this particular technology and, this HR tool in this industry. Who on the team seems to be best fit for that? And then have the AI give us back the information. So we're kind of figuring out the best way to build our own AI tool to help us with that. And then that way we can kind of scale and use it that way. So we've been dabbling in that for about a year now.
Amazing stuff. One of these days, we'll have a conversation about the dress code that our AI made up completely out of a handbook that didn't exist for another day, for another time. Absolutely hilarious. In any event, Michelle, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Michelle Griffin for joining me today. If people want to connect with you or connect with Griffin Resources, what's the best way to do that?
Our website is the best way, at griffin-resources.com. Our direct contact information is on there, but also there's a chat feature that goes directly to our sales associate, and everything is handled directly by a person. So our website is the best way to find us.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So Ventures and Visionaries is grateful to be sponsored by KJ Technology. For over 25 years, KJ has helped middle market businesses unlock growth through strategic technology advisory services. Whether you're a fast-moving alternative financial firm or a boutique wealth management office, KJ delivers tailored managed IT solutions that scale with your ambitions. And for those who only demand the best at home, KJ brings enterprise-grade network technology to high-end residential environments, blending performance, security, and vendor management. From the boardroom to the living room, KJ Technology is redefining what it means to be connected, protected, and empowered. Learn more at kjtechnology.com or info@kjtechnology.com. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day.